Hey all, here are OS Reviews. In this video, we're taking a closer look at the Cubot KingKong AX. This is a rugged Android smartphone that has a relatively stylish appearance, in addition to a rear display on the back that can be used to show notifications and also act as a viewfinder if you want to take slightly higher quality selfies with the rear-facing camera lens. Dual displays, though, are not unique to this particular phone. In fact, models we've seen in the past from Unihertz under their TikTok line have a similar concept. Not to mention devices like the Meizu Pro 7, I believe, is one of the earliest Android smartphones to also have that ticker screen on the rear, plus some modern folding screen smartphones, including the Galaxy Z Flip line, also has that cover screen. But it's still neat to have, again, for showing some quick notification info, or add a touch of customization by having different watch dials be displayed on the rear, similar to on a smartwatch, changing the look of the phone slightly. Now, in terms of system specs, this device is powered by the 6nm MediaTek Helio G99 processor. We've now seen on a number of smartphones and tablets in the more affordable range, and it's a generally good enough performer for getting the basics done and relatively energy efficient. Now, this is also coupled with a 6.5-inch Full HD Plus resolution screen that has a fast 120Hz refresh rate. The phone is 4G LTE unlocked, dual SIM, and also comes with a 5,100 mAh capacity battery, can mostly get through a day and a half, if not 2 or 3 days of use, along with 12 GB of RAM and 256 GB of built-in storage that can be further expanded by a micro SD card slot. The back camera is 100 megapixels for the primary, along with a 32 megapixel front-facing camera. And you also find access to a macro lens as well as a depth sensor for bokeh effects and an LED flash, but there is no ultra-wide angle nor is there a telephoto on this particular setup. Now, in the packaging, aside from the smartphone itself, you'll find the charging cable using standard USB Type-C as well as a wall adapter, and the specs here are printed on the edge, up to 33 watts for fast charging. There's also a SIM ejector pin, a quick start guide, along with a tempered glass screen protector that you also get, although a film screen protector is already pre-applied out of the factory. Now, taking a closer look at the design of the KingKong AX, I think it does look pretty stylish, and first impressions would be that it's a lot more compact and thin than the majority of rugged smartphones that we've covered in the past. It's really not that far off compared to normal phones with a TPU case, just because, again, the battery capacity isn't something ridiculously huge. Case in point, here is the Doogee V30T next to it, as well as the Unihertz tank that kind of takes the cake as being the largest capacity phone that I have reviewed to date. With its 22,000 mAh capacity cell, it's a monster, but also comes at the expense of portability, as you can tell, really feeling like a brick in your pocket compared to this Cubot, which is much more petite by comparison, in fact feeling just like a normal phone, which is impressive in its own right as a rugged device that is rated to be impact resistant from drops, shock, as well as dust and water as well. I'm also a fan of the different textures and materials that they're using here, aside from the typical rubber to add grip as well as aluminum rails. You also have this main section down below, which is actually a flat piece of polycarbonate plastic. However, when you're shining it across the light, it almost makes it look three-dimensional, revealing a lot of detail work, including some of these red stripes and accents that also straddles the boundaries between something rugged as well as more of a gamer aesthetic, I would say. I do like it a lot, although there are no LED lights that physically are illuminated like on the Nothing phone, for example, but still unique enough. And there's also a loudspeaker on the rear. Perhaps the only downside to this particular design is it is a little bit more of a fingerprint magnet and you have to wipe it down every so often, but again, looks good. On the right-hand spine, there's access to a rubber flap covering up the dual SIM card / micro SD card slot. You also find a remappable hotkey, which by default will wake up the secondary display there on the rear. On the right-hand spine, there's access to the volume rocker as well as the power key with an integrated fingerprint scanner, all made out of metal, feel pretty tactile and responsive, a lanyard strap, and on the very bottom, another flap that covers up the USB Type-C port. So this model does not have a standard 3.5mm headphone jack, but you can use a dongle or Bluetooth if preferred. And up front, we have the, again, 6.5-inch Full HD resolution display, IPS LCD, with some additional kind of rubber accents to provide some impact resistance. Interestingly, though, it almost makes it look like there's a hole punch cutout for the display. although in reality it has a teardrop notch and not really a hole punch design. There's also the proximity light sensor and the earpiece up top as well. And there's a small chin at the bottom, but overall it's not too obtrusive. Fingerprint scanner also feels relatively fast and reliable. And the Android 14 operating system is extremely clean. The display is also fully laminated with no gap between the glass and the LCD underneath, making it actually look quite decent even if there's a bit of light hitting on it. And for the most part, I didn't really have any issues when it comes to visibility as well as touch responsiveness. The phone is otherwise equipped with NFC for contactless mobile payment, built-in GPS for location services, as well as the standards like Bluetooth, dual-band Wi-Fi. Taking a closer look at the advanced settings, you can tell that it's a little bit more colorful here compared to stock, but all the essentials can be found, and taking a closer peek at some customization from Cubot for display, you are able to turn on adaptive mode as well as change the colors here to be more boosted versus saturated, adaptive, or natural. You can also turn on and off the LED accent light on the very top for things like notifications and charging status, and you can also optimize the refresh rate from here, so dialing it down to 90 Hz versus standard 60 Hz to improve the battery life, but 120 will be the smoothest when it comes to fast sliding actions on the phone's display. The water drop notch can also be hidden by using a software mode here, and you're able to just make it a black bar, although because it isn't a OLED panel here, it might not be 100% convincing, but still is a neat software trick that you can play with. For audio, you'll also find a loudness enhancement function that you can use to boost the sound if you're finding a YouTube video to be too quiet, for example. There's also a hi-fi mode that'll automatically trigger profiles like aptX lossless if you have a compatible pair of wireless headphones. Now further down here, you can also take a look at the virtual RAM expansion. Although it isn't exactly the same thing as actual RAM, it will still make multitasking feel a little bit more smooth, and you get up to 24 gigabytes with the augmented amount. As for biometrics, aside from fingerprint scanning, you can also use Face Unlock, though it's not quite as secure since there is no depth sensor on this particular phone, but there is that option in addition to traditional password and PIN. You can also take a look at the side key function, so that is customizing what this particular key will trigger, including waking up that rear display, but you can also double click as well as long press to trigger other commands. For example, starting to record audio automatically, opening up the flashlight, capturing a screenshot, contacting SOS, or accessing the gaming mode. So these can all be triggered, or even opening up any program that you have on your phone. Now you can also find the mini screen profile here. This allows us to customize that rear display's watch dial, very similar to on a smartwatch, and you are able to even use your own image as the background, in addition to choose what type of watch face and crown you prefer. Here's a quick example of an astronaut, and it's a little bit more animated, also showing the pedometer for number of steps that you've walked. Sharpness also seems to be adequate. So just going through some other examples here very quickly. Again, overall, all of these look relatively attractive, and you can also choose what types of notifications you want to pass through, the screen timeout function, whether you want that pedometer mode to be turned on or off. There's also gestures like double tap on the rear display to turn it on if you want to have an alternative to the button here on the side. Cubot does include some custom wallpapers, which do look relatively attractive, showing off the kind of vibrancy of the display, as you can tell there with some of the colors, and you have a few more gradient effect wallpapers on here as well. You can download more yourself for additional customization, but this is an example of what is included out of the box. Last but not least, there are 3 different themes that they've also included if you want to switch back and forth between something like entertainment, work versus regular home usage, you can do so. So if we tap on one of the other themes here, you'll see that the icon pack also changes, so you are able to play around with some of those options based on what you prefer. Now taking a closer look at the secondary display here next, we're able to swipe down to take a look at our battery percentage remaining on the phone, swipe up to see any quick notifications, including missed calls, text messages, and social media apps. It will show a few lines of the message that you can check out, and then swiping over to the right, you can access many widgets for things including the compass, actually quite neat. Once over here into a live viewfinder for the rear camera here, up to 108 megapixels. Music playback, including on YouTube, as well as Spotify, anything locally on your phone, can also be played, paused, and skip track just by using this rear display as well. And this particular screen, by the way, is also slightly recessed with a bit of aluminum accents here on the side, so it's not completely touching the table surface when you're laying it down, adding just a little bit more of protection. And the phone also doesn't really wobble on a flat surface either. Now moving into a quick demo of video and what audio sounds like with the built-in speakers next. So takeaway being that it is actually a fairly loud exterior speaker, which is kind of a must, I would say, for a rugged phone, since if you are in an emergency trying to use it as a siren, it can be helpful there, or as a speakerphone. That being said, it is a, again, rear-facing mono speaker, which is one design that I would preferably like change into stereo units, maybe one place on the edge here and one on the front that will give you better stereo separation if you're consuming media, for instance. But at least the loudness is sufficient for a phone speaker at the end of the day. And again, this full HD resolution screen offers some pretty nice looking colors, especially on the more saturated profiles. As you can tell, that is quite good for consuming videos on YouTube and Netflix without too many problems. Picture-in-picture can also be done, as well as split-screen multitasking. For example, browsing the web while watching a video can all be handled on here without too many issues. Again, the phone chip here doesn't really have too much thermal throttling issues to speak of. The 6nm processor is pretty energy efficient. And now taking a closer look at the camera, it's relatively simple to use. There is the AI scene detection mode that can recognize if you're pointing at food versus text, for example, and will change the photo properties automatically. Alternatively, you can play around with HDR, although you have to use either this one or AI and not both at the same time. The gear icon here allows you to choose some additional settings, including the ability to take burst shots up to 20 photos at once, geotagging with location services, not to mention face detection, autofocus, and also the resolution of the photos, which you can tell is maximum at 25 megapixels by default. And that's because the 100 megapixel mode is a separate tab on the slider down below here. You can record video up to 1440p, slightly higher than 1080. However, there is no 4K capture on this particular model, though interestingly, you do have HDR on video capture as well to provide a little bit more contrasty looking colors. There's also going to be a night mode to, again, slightly increase the exposure time if you're in a lower light situation, a portrait mode for bokeh, beauty mode for softening up the skin if you're taking portraits, and the full 108 megapixel mode. Under more, you can find a mono black and white filter mode as well, can be neat for things like street photography. Pro mode allows you to adjust properties like ISO, white balance manually. A macro close-up mode can also be triggered here, along with a QR code scanner, interestingly, though you can also just use Google Lens directly from the home screen as another alternative. Here are some quick examples, starting with the macro lens, which is around 2 megapixels. It's not the highest res thing in the world, but allows you to get a little bit more close up to objects as long as you have sufficient lighting and you're holding still, because there is no OIS on that secondary lens. Now, as for the primary sensor, it's actually quite good for a rugged phone, that is. Sharpness is more than satisfactory when it comes to cropping into text details, and also colors are showing some pretty decent looking vibrant results as well, and it's a fairly pleasing looking photo, I have to admit. Here's some other examples with HDR turned on. It's not crushing too much details on some of the darker regions as well. The various colors and textures are getting retained thanks to the HDR on board, relatively quick to snap as well. All in all, if you're using this for landscape shots when outdoors, or even taking some underwater photography, for example in a river or pool, you should be more than satisfied. For ultra low light performance, it's not going to be necessarily an iPhone or Pixel killer, just because the computational photography of a rugged device from a smaller phone brand isn't necessarily going to be in that same tier. So I would still recommend shooting in more well-lit conditions if possible. Now, as far as web browsing is concerned, we have the standard Gboard keyboard that supports swipe as well, and overall it works nicely. Haptic vibrations, though, are merely average on this phone, and in terms of loading speeds, as we've mentioned in other products running on the Helio G99, it definitely punches above its weight when it comes to overall responsiveness is more than satisfactory. In fact, as you are swiping around the UI, pinch to zoom all feels pretty smooth for the most part, despite the Verge desktop site here being pretty heavy with lots of videos, ads, and scrolling elements. A couple of extra utility tools you'll find on here include a toolbox, similar to other rugged phones, a sound meter, which will use the microphone to know how loud your surroundings are if you are in construction, for example. There's also going to be a protractor, as well as a level tool that helps you know if you're staying flat or not using the phone's accelerometers, and also a alarm bell, aka siren, if you are in an emergency. It will just play a very loud sound using the exterior speaker. You can also find the aforementioned pedometer here if you want to trigger it manually from this app, see a little bit more information that's getting collected by the phone. A basic sound recorder can also be found on here as well for memos and notes, and there is even a game mode on board, which if you trigger will close out of any background applications and optimize just the gaming performance, blocking any incoming calls, for instance. As an alternative to the regular launcher, Cubot also has a child mode. It essentially only allows you to access certain programs that you can set up under a security password if you're giving it to a child, or you want to, again, have a more minimalistic approach and free from any distractions, for example. There's also going to be physical keys on the bottom for navigation instead. So now taking a quick look at the gaming performance next. As we've touched on other Helio G99 devices in the past, it's more than satisfactory for casual gaming titles. In fact, even heavier games including Asphalt, PUBG, Minecraft will still install and run without too many problems. It's just you may have to wait for a few occasional moments longer for it to first load back, so you should still be mostly satisfied with just some casual gameplay experience on this phone. So that is more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the Cubot KingKong AX. As long as you don't need 5G connectivity for cellular, I have to say this is a pretty cool showing as a thin and lightweight rugged phone, which is actually kind of hard to come across. It's got an interesting design with that rear display, showing some additional customization, and despite the slim chassis, it's still going to be more impact-proof compared to your conventional device if you want something military specified and you're a bit more rough with your electronics. So the basics are all here in a fairly attractively designed phone. You can check out more details if you're interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the Cubot KingKong AX.